I thought I was just late for my anniversary dinner, but the moment the streetlights flickered out, I realized I'd been cast in a lethal game of survival. Now, with an internal investigation closing in and a reality that refuses to make sense, I have to figure out why they think I'm the key to an organized scheme before I'm erased from existence entirely. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the city lights into blurred neon smears against the pavement. I was sitting in my car, engine idling, watching the sliding glass doors of the office building where my wife worked. We had a dinner reservation at 8, our anniversary, and I was already 10 minutes late because of the gridlock. I checked my watch, sighed, and reached over to turn up the radio, but the dial static was grating. I killed the engine, letting the silence settle around me. It was that kind of heavy, humid night where every shadow seemed to stretch and contort. I leaned back, drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, and then I saw her. At first I thought it was an optical illusion caused by the rain-streaked windshield. She stepped out from the darkened alcove of the building next door, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace. My breath hitched. She was tall, impossibly tall. I don't mean model tall or basketball player tall. She towered over the nearby street lamps, her head easily brushing the lower branches of the oak trees lining the sidewalk. She had to be at least 12 feet tall, maybe more, her limbs elongated in a way that defied everything I knew about human anatomy. I rubbed my eyes, sure that the stress of the day had finally caused me to snap. When I opened them, she was still there. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a dark, shimmering dress that seemed to absorb the light around it. She walked toward the center of the sidewalk, and with every step, her long, spindly legs moved with a rhythmic, silent precision. It was terrifying, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. She stopped right under a flickering street lamp, tilted her head back, and looked directly toward my car. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I instinctively ducked lower, hiding behind the dashboard. Had she seen me? She wasn't just observing the street. She was hunting. I scanned the area. The street was deserted. No pedestrians, no other cars. Just me and this towering figure. She started to walk again, not toward the office building, but directly toward my vehicle. Each step made the ground vibrate, a low-frequency hum that I felt in my teeth. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them into the gap between the seat and the console. "Damn it!" I hissed under my breath, scrabbling frantically in the darkness. Outside, the rhythmic thud-thud of her footsteps grew louder, closer. She was right beside the car now. I could see the hem of her dress through the passenger side window, a fabric that looked like liquid velvet, shifting between deep blues and blacks. Then the streetlights went out. The entire block plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow from my dashboard clock. I froze. The passenger door handle clicked. I hadn't locked it. I reached over to slam it shut, but it was too late. The door creaked open, and a rush of freezing air flooded the cabin, carrying the scent of ozone and wet earth. "You're not him," a voice whispered. It didn't sound like it came from outside. It sounded like it was vibrating directly inside my skull, cold and clinical. I looked up, trembling, and saw her face. Her features were too symmetrical, too perfect, her eyes glowing with a faint, bioluminescent light. She looked down at me, her immense frame somehow folding itself to fit into the cramped space of the sedan, as if she were made of nothing more than smoke and shadows. She reached out a long, slender finger and traced the line of my jaw. Her skin felt like smooth marble, freezing cold. She tilted her head, her gaze shifting to the passenger seat, where my anniversary gift from my wife sat, a small, wrapped box. She picked it up with 2 fingers, examining it with a detached curiosity that made my skin crawl. "I was told there would be an exchange here," she continued, her voice devoid of any human inflection. "The organized scheme requires precision. If you are not the contact, then you are a liability, and liabilities must be handled before the internal investigation catches the scent." My mind raced. Organized scheme? Internal investigation? I had no idea what she was talking about, but I knew one thing for certain. I was in the middle of something far beyond a simple dinner mix-up. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing until they were nothing but thin, piercing slits of silver. "Who sent you?" she asked. Before I could answer, a black SUV roared around the corner, its high beams blinding me. It slammed on its brakes, skidding sideways across the slick asphalt to block our escape. 3 men in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. The woman didn't panic. She didn't even blink. She merely looked at the men, then back at me, a faint, chilling smile touching her lips. "It seems," she murmured, "that your night is about to become significantly more complicated." She reached out, grabbed the steering wheel with one hand, and with a strength that should have torn the metal from the chassis, she ripped the column clear off. The engine died instantly, and the car lurched forward as the first shot shattered my windshield. I curled into a ball, glass raining down on me, as the woman stepped out into the chaotic crossfire, her massive form shifting and distorting as if she were phasing through the very air. One of the gunmen stumbled back, his weapon clattering to the ground, his face pale with shock as he realized who, or what, they were dealing with. The woman turned her gaze to him, and the world seemed to slow to a crawl. She held out her hand, and I watched, paralyzed, as the air around the men began to shimmer and warp, pulling them toward her as if she were a black hole. But then a red laser dot appeared on her chest, followed by the heavy, authoritative voice of someone approaching from behind the SUV. "Drop the target," the voice commanded, cold and unwavering. "This area is under the jurisdiction of the internal security team. You're being held for a potential breach of the organized scheme and suspected involvement in the trade of restricted substances. Put your hands up, or we authorize lethal force." The woman paused, her hand hovering just inches from the lead gunman's throat. She looked toward the darkness behind the SUV, then slowly turned her head back to me. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of amusement and something else. Pity. "They aren't here for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "They're here for what you're hiding in the trunk." My blood ran cold. The trunk. I hadn't put anything in the trunk. I turned to look at her, my mouth hanging open, but the words died in my throat as she stepped aside, letting the red laser dot settle squarely on my own chest. The internal security team was closing in, and I realized with sickening clarity that my life had just become a game board, and I was the piece they were about to sacrifice. The red dot danced across my chest, steady and lethal. The rain-slicked asphalt reflected the harsh strobes of the SUV's emergency lights, creating a strobing, nightmarish tableau. My hands were pressed against the roof of the car, my breath hitching in my lungs. The men in tactical gear weren't police. Their uniforms bore no insignia, just matte black fabric and charcoal gray plates. The woman, that towering, impossible entity, had seemingly vanished into the periphery, leaving me exposed. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands behind your head," the lead agent commanded. His voice was synthesized, distorted through a high-end communicator. "Do not reach for the latch. Do not attempt to communicate with the subject currently fleeing the scene." I obeyed, my movements sluggish and heavy. As I slid out of the driver's side seat, the cold rain lashed against my face, stinging like needles. I looked toward the back of the car, expecting to see the woman, but the space behind the SUV was empty. She hadn't just walked away. It was as if she had dissolved into the mist. "Get on your knees," the man ordered, closing the distance between us. He had the build of a professional fighter, his movements efficient and predatory. He kept his weapon trained on me with terrifying ease. Behind him, two others moved toward the trunk of my car. "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, my voice sounding small and fragile against the roar of the downpour. "I'm just waiting for my wife. It's our anniversary. I don't have anything in the trunk except—" "Quiet," the lead agent snapped. He stepped into the light, and for the first time I saw his face, or rather, the lack of one. He wore a featureless, tactical visor that acted as a one-way mirror. "You were identified at the rendezvous point as a courier for the organized scheme. Your vehicle has been tracked since you crossed the city limit. We have reason to believe your transport contains restricted substances intended for the radical network." "This is a mistake," I shouted, the adrenaline finally overriding my fear. "You have the wrong car, the wrong person. Check the license plate." One of the agents at the rear of the car groaned as he jammed a crowbar into the trunk seam. With a metallic shriek, the lock gave way. I flinched, expecting to see a cache of illegal goods, or perhaps some dangerous contraband that would finalize the charge against me. Instead, the trunk popped open, and the lead agent leaned over to shine a high-intensity flashlight into the interior. He froze. The light illuminated not a stash of illicit packages, but a chaotic, swirling vortex of black, oily smoke that seemed to pulse in time with the streetlights. It didn't belong in the physical world. It felt like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. A low, thrumming sound, the same frequency I'd felt through the floorboards earlier, began to resonate from the trunk, vibrating through the car frame until the tires hummed against the wet pavement. "What is that?" the agent breathed, his composure shattering. Before I could answer, the smoke surged outward, lashing out like a living thing. It bypassed the agent and coiled itself around my wrist, pulling me violently toward the back of the car. I screamed, digging my heels into the mud, but the force was absolute. The agent fired a shot, but the bullet vanished into the swirling mist without so much as a spark. "It's a containment breach," the agent yelled, backing away. "Initiate the lockdown. The internal security protocol is active." The ground began to crack beneath our feet. I wasn't just being pulled. I was being drawn into the vortex. My entire body felt like it was being stretched, pulled toward a point of infinite pressure. The woman appeared again, standing atop the roof of my sedan. She looked down at me, her silhouette stark against the chaotic, shifting clouds of the smoke. "You were never a courier," she said, her voice cutting through the thrumming noise like a blade. "You are the anchor, and the time for holding has ended." She reached down, her long pale fingers wrapping around my collar. With a singular, effortless motion, she yanked me upward, lifting me off the ground. The world blurred. The rain turned into streaks of light. The SUV dissolved into a dark smudge, and the agents became nothing more than echoes of shouts. I felt the air pressure change instantly. A vacuum sensation that popped my ears and left me gasping for oxygen that wasn't there. We hit the ground, not on asphalt, but on a cold, sterile floor of polished obsidian. The transition was so abrupt that my knees buckled. I looked around, frantic. I was in a massive, windowless hall, illuminated by rows of floating, bioluminescent orbs. The walls were lined with rows of identical cars, all identical to mine, stretching into an infinite distance. The woman stood before me, her stature now even more imposing in the vast, cathedral-like space. She adjusted her dress, the fabric rippling like black water. "Where am I?" I gasped, clutching my chest as my heart struggled to regulate itself. Are we still in the city?" She turned to face me, her eyes glowing with that same cold, silver luminescence. "You're in the transit zone. You've been pulled from your timeline because you were the only one who could open the seal. The organized scheme spent centuries trying to crack the code, but they were looking for a key. They didn't realize they needed a heartbeat." She walked toward a massive arching gateway at the far end of the hall. The gateway was pulsing with a rhythmic golden light that made my teeth ache. "Follow me," she commanded. "If we don't reach the center before the internal security team recalibrates, you will be erased from existence, and not just this life. Every version of you that has ever walked the earth." I stood there, paralyzed, looking back at the spot where I had arrived. A ripple in the air was beginning to form, a jagged tear in the reality of the room. Through the tear, I could see them, not the agents, but something else. Figures draped in long hooded robes, their faces hidden behind masks of shifting geometric patterns, were stepping through the rift, wielding weapons that hummed with a sound that made my skin crawl. The woman stopped and glanced back at me, her expression uncharacteristically urgent. "Move, unless you want to see what happens when the organized scheme finally collects their debt." I took a step toward her, my legs shaking, but a sudden piercing siren began to wail throughout the hall. The rows of cars began to shift, the floor beneath me turning into a treadmill that forced me away from the gateway. From the rift, a voice boomed, deep, echoing, and terrifyingly familiar. "There you are, brother. Did you really think you could hide in a past that no longer exists?" The figure at the front of the intruders pulled back his hood, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I stumbled back, my hands hitting a cold, metallic surface. The man standing at the mouth of the rift wasn't a stranger. He was me. Older, scarred, and wearing the same clothes I had chosen for our anniversary dinner. He stared at me with eyes full of a hatred so profound it felt like a physical blow. He raised a hand, and the very air in the room ignited with a pale, violet flame. "It's time to settle the account," my double whispered, stepping into the hall. The violet flames didn't burn. They hummed with a sound like 1,000 angry wasps, searing the air as my double advanced. I looked from the scarred, older version of myself to the woman, who now stood between us like a silent sentinel, her body rippling with that same oily, dark energy I'd seen in the trunk. The obsidian floor groaned. tiny spiderweb cracks spidering out from where his feet struck the ground. "You look confused," my double said, his voice a gravelly, aged version of my own. He didn't walk. He glided, the space around him warping as if he were dragging a heavy weight behind him. "You think this is a kidnapping? An accident? You were always so naive. You spent your life believing you were a simple man with a simple job, never noticing the strings, never noticing that every major turning point in your life was calculated by the organized scheme. I don't know who you are," I shouted, my voice cracking. I backed away, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, until I hit the cold, hard surface of a parked vehicle. "I'm not a part of your group. I don't deal in restricted substances or whatever it is you people do." The woman turned her head slightly. "He's not lying," she said to my double. "He hasn't been activated yet. The synchronization hasn't taken hold." My double laughed, a dry, hacking sound that seemed to rattle the very foundations of the hall. "Hasn't been activated? Look at his wrist." I instinctively pulled my sleeve back. There, etched into my skin, was a glowing, intricate pattern of lines that looked like a circuit board woven into my veins. It was pulsing with a faint blue rhythm that matched the thrumming of the gateway behind us. I gasped, stumbling back, clutching my arm as if I could tear the markings off. I had never seen these before. They felt like they had been burned into me since birth. "You are the vessel," my double continued, his eyes glowing with the same violet intensity as the flames in his hands. "The internal security team isn't here to arrest us. They're here to harvest the energy you've been storing. Every failure in your life, every moment of heartbreak, every time you were passed over or knocked down, that was them conditioning you. They needed a host with enough latent trauma to act as a battery. And tonight is the anniversary of the final charge." The woman stepped closer to me, her height making her look like a goddess of some forgotten, darker age. "He's trying to goad you into a fight, to force a resonance spike. If you lash out, you feed the internal security machine. If you remain passive, you die. There is a third option, but it requires you to surrender your memory." "Surrender my memory?" I looked at her, horror mounting. "That's my life, my wife, our anniversary, who I am." "Those are constructs," the woman replied, her tone softening just a fraction. "Fragments of a simulated reality designed to keep you sedated. The woman you call your wife, she's an agent of the organized scheme. She's been monitoring your vitals for years, waiting for the exact moment the energy levels hit the threshold." As if on cue, the far end of the hall shifted. The wall shimmered, turning transparent, and I saw a view into my own living room. My wife was there, sitting on our sofa, staring at a screen that displayed my own heartbeat in real time. She wasn't crying. She wasn't waiting for me to come home. She was typing into a holographic console, her face etched with a cold, professional detachment. My stomach turned. I watched, paralyzed, as she reached for a remote and pressed a button. Suddenly, the street outside my house, the one I was supposed to be driving on, burst into flames. My car, or the decoy I had left behind, was incinerated in a blast that sent debris flying into the night. She didn't even flinch. She simply adjusted her glasses and continued her work. "See?" my double sneered, gesturing toward the screen. "You were meant to die in that car. A clean exit. The organized scheme would have retrieved your remains, extracted the battery, and moved on to the next host. But you were stubborn. You didn't leave the office on time. You sat in that car, waiting for a woman who was never going to show up. You disrupted the timeline, and now the internal security team is coming to wipe up the mess." The air in the room grew heavy, the gravity shifting so that I had to drop to one knee just to keep from being thrown against the ceiling. The gateway behind me began to scream, a high-pitched metallic shriek that signaled a full-scale incursion. A dozen figures in white tactical armor, the true internal security cleaners, started pouring through the rift, their weapons drawn. "Choose," the woman urged, reaching out a hand. "I can take you through the gate, but it will rewrite your neural pathways. You won't remember the wife, the life, or the pain. You'll be a blank slate, free from the organized scheme. Or you can stand with him and fight and be erased entirely by the security team." My double raised his hand, the violet flame growing into a swirling, blinding orb. "Come with me, and we can tear this entire facility down. We can burn the organized scheme to the ground and take back what they stole from us." The security agents were closing in, their weapons humming with a red, predatory light. I looked at the screen of my wife, then at the scarred face of my double, and finally at the woman, whose eyes held an ancient, sorrowful wisdom. I felt the circuits in my arm burn, the heat becoming unbearable. I stood up, my mind reeling. I wasn't a battery. I wasn't a courier. I was something else, something they had overlooked. I looked at the agents, then stepped forward, reaching not for the woman's hand, but for the energy radiating from my double's orb. "I don't choose either of you," I whispered. I shoved my hand directly into the center of the violet flame. The room went silent. The world turned white, and then everything stopped. The security agents froze in mid-stride. My double's eyes widened in shock. The woman gasped. As the energy surged through me, I didn't feel pain. I felt a flood of information. Every secret, every location of the organized scheme's headquarters, and the true location of the woman I thought was my wife. But as the power took hold, the floor beneath us dissolved entirely, and we all began to fall into a dark, endless void. Just before I lost consciousness, I saw a familiar face watching us from the edge of the abyss. My wife, but not the one I knew. She was standing there, holding a tablet, her eyes glowing with a terrifying golden light, and she was smiling as she watched us drop. "Phase 1 complete," she whispered. "Bring him to the core." The fall felt like an eternity, a descent through layers of static and shattered memories. Each time I tried to grip reality, a fragment of my life tore away like burnt paper. One moment I was a man waiting for his wife in the rain. The next I was a conduit for a power so ancient and volatile that it felt like my very cells were screaming. I hit a surface that felt like liquid silk. I didn't bounce, nor did I break bones. I simply sank into it, drifting in a state of suspended animation. The void around me shimmered with the ghosts of cities I had never visited and faces I had never known. The woman who stood twice my height was there, hovering just inches from my face, her silver eyes scanning my skin as if reading a map written in light. "You did it," she whispered, her voice echoing in the chamber of my own mind. "You didn't break. Most of them shatter the moment the synchronization begins. But you? You absorb the resonance. You're not just a battery anymore, you're the master key." I pushed myself up, my muscles feeling fluid and strange. The glowing circuits on my arm were no longer just etched into my skin. They were beginning to glow with a blinding white intensity, casting long, dancing shadows against the liquid floor. I looked around. We weren't in a prison, and we weren't in a torture chamber. We were inside a massive hollowed-out sphere that hung suspended in the middle of a nebula of pure, raw energy. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow and cold. "Where is the woman who orchestrated this, the one who told me to go to the core?" "She is the architect of the organized scheme," the woman replied, gesturing toward the horizon of the sphere, where giant metallic structures rotated slowly like the gears of a cosmic clock. "She isn't just your wife. She's the terminal point for every operation they run across the timelines. She's the one who harvests the residue of the lives they destroy." Suddenly the floor beneath us erupted. A column of blinding gold light shot up from the center of the sphere, pinning us in place. I looked up to see a platform descending, and there she was, my wife, or the thing that looked like her. She stood perfectly still, her hair flowing upward as if she were underwater, her golden eyes fixed on me with a terrifyingly clinical precision. "You were never meant to survive the transfer, husband," she said, her voice layering over itself like a chorus of thousands. "You were meant to be the catalyst, but you've proven to be a delightful anomaly. The organized scheme has never encountered a host who could bridge the gap between their own past and the future of the network." She stepped off the platform, walking on air as if it were solid stone. Behind her, rows of faceless, white-clad security agents marched in perfect synchronization, their weapons now glowing with an unstable, emerald fire. "The internal security team has been authorized to wipe this entire sector," she continued, not even glancing at the soldiers behind her. "We are rebooting the timeline. Your existence, your struggles, your search for meaning, it's all just temporary cache data. By the time the sunrise hits your home in the old world, you will have never existed at all." "I'm not letting you erase me," I growled, feeling the surge of white energy in my veins flare in response to her coldness. I reached out, my fingers tracing the air, and felt the fabric of the room bend beneath my touch. "Don't," the woman beside me warned. her voice tight with fear. "If you fight her here, you'll collapse the sphere. Everything goes. The organized scheme, the agents, and the version of reality you call home." I looked at the architect, the woman who had played me like a puppet. I looked at the soldiers ready to end me. Then I looked at my arm, at the pulsing white circuits that were now weaving themselves into my clothes, my skin, my very soul. I realized then that she was right. I was a key, but keys don't just open doors, they lock them too. I turned to the tall woman and whispered, "If I lock this place down, can you get the others out? The ones who are still trapped in the loops?" She paused, her eyes widening. "You'd be trapped here forever. You'd become the anchor for the entire void." "Better than letting them keep playing their game," I said. I turned back to the architect and smiled, a jagged, broken expression that made her step back for the first time. I reached into the center of the white energy emanating from my chest and grabbed hold of the connection between us, the invisible tether she had used to manipulate my every move for years. "You wanted a battery?" I asked. "Fine. Let's see how much power you can handle." I slammed my fist into the floor, not physical but spiritual, tapping directly into the heart of the sphere. The entire structure groaned, the metal gears shrieking as they ground to a halt. The emerald fire of the soldiers' weapons turned to ash, and the architect's golden eyes flickered and died, replaced by a look of sheer, panicked realization. "No!" she screamed, her voice losing its chorus of layers. "You don't know what you're doing. You're destroying the balance." The sphere began to fracture. Great fissures opened up, revealing the cold, dark nothingness of the outer void. Gravity ceased to function, and we all began to float, suspended in the eye of a dying storm. I felt my grip on reality slipping, the memories of my dinner reservation, the rain, and the office building fading into the distance. But as the walls of the sphere shattered, I saw something that stopped my heart. Through the largest crack I saw my own living room, not a simulation, not a screen, but the real thing. And sitting on the sofa was a man, me, holding a ring box, waiting for the front door to open. I was watching myself, from the future, from a place of destruction, trying to warn the man I used to be. The architect grabbed my throat, her grip like iron. "If you do this, you erase the chance for that version of you to have the life you lost. You're condemning yourself to this prison." I looked at the man on the sofa, then back to the architect, and I let go of everything. I pushed the white energy out into the room, creating a shockwave that threatened to tear the fabric of the void asunder. "I'm not condemning myself," I whispered. "I'm setting him free." As the white light swallowed us whole, I saw a figure emerge from the shadows of the rift. Not an agent, not a double, but something truly ancient, something that had been watching this whole time from the dark. It reached out, and as our fingers touched, the final seal of the organized scheme began to dissolve. But the floor beneath me didn't just break. It vanished into absolute zero. I felt myself falling, not into the void, but into the center of my own past. And as I hit the pavement of the street outside my office, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "You're late for your anniversary." The pavement beneath me was cold, hard, and unmistakably real. The rain, actual biting, freezing rain, lashed at my face, stinging my cheeks with a sensation so vibrant and visceral that I let out a choked, desperate sob. I was sprawled on my hands and knees in the gutter, right in front of the office building where I worked. My clothes were soaked through, and the stench of exhaust and wet pavement filled my lungs. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding a rhythm that felt like a frantic, desperate prayer. I checked my wrist. Nothing. No circuits, no glowing patterns, just skin. I looked up at the sky. The clouds were churning, but the bioluminescent orbs were gone, replaced by the mundane, flickering orange of city streetlights. I turned toward my car. It was sitting exactly where I'd left it, its engine silent, the doors locked. I approached it with trembling hands, fearing that if I touched it, the metal would melt into smoke, or the glass would turn to liquid. But the handle was solid chrome, cold and unyielding. I opened the door, and the interior light flickered to life, bathing the cabin in a soft yellow glow. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. My anniversary gift, that small, wrapped box, was sitting on the passenger seat, exactly where I had left it. I reached out and touched it, the paper rough and familiar against my fingertips. I wasn't an anchor, a battery, or a key. I was just a man. But the weight in my gut, the lingering trauma of a reality I couldn't fully shake, told me that I had been to the edge of something that could destroy everything. I put the keys in the ignition, and the engine roared to life with a comforting mechanical growl. I didn't wait. I drove. I didn't care about the traffic or the red lights. I just drove until the city skyline faded into the distance, and I pulled into my driveway. The house was dark, save for the porch light. My wife's car was in the drive. I parked, stepped out into the rain, and walked toward the front door. Every shadow I passed looked like a potential threat. Every gust of wind sounded like a whispered secret from the void. But I forced myself to keep moving. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet, smelling of lavender and the dinner she had promised to keep warm. She was in the kitchen, turning off the stove as I walked in. She looked up, her expression one of mild surprise, her eyes clear, bright, and unmistakably human. No golden glow, no hidden agenda, no clinical detachment. "You're late," she said, a playful smile touching her lips. "I thought you got stuck in the storm again." I stood there, trembling, and walked toward her. I took her face in my hands, searching her eyes for even a glimmer of the architect, for a sign that this was another layer of the simulation. But there was nothing there except love and a hint of concern. I pulled her into a hug so tight it left me breathless, clinging to her like a shipwreck survivor to a piece of driftwood. "I'm sorry," I whispered into her hair. "I'm so, so sorry." "Hey," she pulled back, looking at me with a frown. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked around the kitchen. It was ordinary. It was perfect. "I had the strangest dream. I thought I lost you. I thought I lost everything." She laughed, a soft, warm sound that shattered the last of the tension in my chest. "Well, you didn't. You're home. We're here." We sat down to eat, and for the first time in my life, I tasted every bite. I listened to her talk about her day, about the mundane reports and the boring meetings, and I realized that the organized scheme had tried to turn me into something cold and efficient by stripping away the humanity that made me vulnerable. They wanted me to be a machine, but they forgot that a machine can't love, and it can't mourn. Later that night, as we sat on the sofa, I reached for my pocket. I pulled out a small metallic object I had found in my jacket, the only remnant of the journey. It was a shard of obsidian, smooth and black, reflecting the light of the living room. I stared at it for a moment, then walked to the fireplace. I threw the shard into the dying embers. It didn't sizzle or smoke. It simply turned to fine gray ash, vanishing into the soot. The last connection to the transit zone was gone. I went back to the sofa and sat beside my wife, wrapping my arm around her. The storm outside had passed, and the silence of the night was finally, truly peaceful. I looked at the window, expecting to see a figure watching me, or a tear in the sky, but there was only the reflection of our own warm, quiet life. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since the rain started that evening, I didn't see the woman who was 12 feet tall, or the double who wanted to burn the world. I saw nothing but the future. The next morning I woke up to the sound of birds and the smell of coffee. I went to the office, did my work, and walked out the door at exactly 5 o'clock. I didn't look at the alleyways. I didn't check for shadows. I walked to my car, got in, and drove home. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a woman standing on the sidewalk across the street. She was tall, unnaturally tall, her head brushing the branches of the oak trees. She stood perfectly still, watching me. I felt my heart skip a beat, the cold hand of panic brushing against my spine. I sat in the car, my hand gripping the steering wheel, and watched her through the rearview mirror. She didn't move. She didn't approach. She simply tilted her head, a silent acknowledgement, a ghost of a life I had survived. Then she turned and walked away, her steps so light they barely pressed into the pavement, until she rounded the corner and disappeared into the morning fog. I watched until she was gone. Then I exhaled, feeling a profound sense of finality. The organized scheme was still out there. The internal security team was still operating in the shadows, and the reality I knew was likely just one layer of an infinite, fragile stack. But it was my layer. It was my life. And as I turned off the engine and walked toward my front door, I knew that no matter what waited in the dark, I was finally, truly, the one in control of my own story. I opened the door, stepped inside, and left the world of shadows behind forever.